everybody. It's Sean Lemazny, and I'm sitting here with Sean Petrosky. Hey, Sean.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Wonderful.
Good. This is the customer and the service, and in this podcast, we typically talk about customer service, best practices for businesses and individuals who are in the life of serving others through products, services, and interactions. And Sean and I both do that. And we all interact with people all day long, I think, who can provide great customer service no matter what it is that they're offering. And sometimes go far beyond the expected norm, and sometimes don't. And I think that Sean and I like to focus on the ones that don't as a way of improving that interaction. So there are a few topics that Sean and I have talked about in our pre-show. The first is a topic of openness as service. And the specific examples that I want to give on my side are the application Scratch, the application or the hardware of Arduino, and the hardware of Raspberry Pi. And the reason I bring those three up in particular is because for anybody who's listening to this who is in the Princeton area, I'm going to be teaching these topics at Princeton Public Library over the summer. The schedule has not been released yet, but it's definitely happening, and Scratch in particular is going to be for kids because it's a great interface for teaching kids about programming, whereas Arduino and Raspberry Pi are for everybody, but are probably more specifically geared towards adults or people who have some experience with tinkering with hardware. So let's talk about each of those separately. Scratch is an application, and what it allows you to do is to essentially use programming like blocks, like Lego blocks. And it allows you to, for example, take a sprite or an object on a canvas, on a screen, and move it. You probably remember the application from the 80s when we were all learning how to use BASIC called Turtle. Have we talked about this on this show?
You mean Logo?
Or Logo, yeah, the turtle on Logo.
Yes.
And you would say, for example, in a BASIC-like language, turtle move, left 90 degrees and move forward, 10 steps.
RT90 FW50.
Exactly right. And so it is that protocol that is the important learning aspect, because if you can understand protocol and the way to give instructions to an application, you can basically begin to learn any application. You can learn how functions work and learn how logic works in applications and learn how you can use numbers in order to create randomness and so forth and so on. So in the case of Scratch, it is very much like putting Legos together. You take a red block and that indicates that you have a particular sprite, like a let's say a picture of a cat, which is the default sprite that they use. And a sprite is just a character or an object that goes onto this canvas. Canvas is just a rectangle, sort of a page. And Scratch is meant to be a storytelling interface, and it's meant to be a programming interface, and it's meant to be a tool for animation, and it's meant to be a tool for interaction. So you can say, for example, if sprite 1 touches sprite 2, make sprite 2 explode and disappear. Or if sprite 1 touches the wall, make it turn 90 degrees and bounce. So you can think of it as also a great way for building games, because you can build logic into Scratch that allows certain physical things to happen to the sprites in order to make them react the way that you would expect in a game, right? So a really great example of a way that you could use Scratch is to build a basic version of Pong. And in fact, there's an example in the Scratch application when you download and install it, where you can open up this game, and it's very simple version of Pong, or Pong, yeah, where you have a paddle and you have a ball-based sprite object, and they're both sprites. You move the paddle back and forth. It can only move on one axis, and the ball bounces like it does in every version of the game you've ever seen. And what's beautiful about it is you can use that basic logic to understand and build completely other different games that use physical logic. You know, you could build your own Angry Birds game theoretically. So it's a very simple, very easy to understand, very introductory interface to a very powerful set of outcomes, especially for somebody who's never programmed before. It's a very beautiful way to put objects together, to sort of click them together in order to make things happen. So that's Scratch. The reason why I'm talking about it in terms of customer service is because on a couple levels, there is service being provided to the users of Scratch from the makers of Scratch, in that they have broken down the complexity that is usually encountered by somebody who's getting started with programming into its most basic parts. And there's a beautiful service to customers in that. Because if you think about it, most other programming interfaces are not like this. If you want to learn how to do Bash scripts, or if you want to learn how to do ActiveX programming, or if you want to learn how to do PHP, or you want to learn how to do HTML, there are tools that make it simpler to do that, and I would offer that those are customer service too. But for the most part, the way that many people learn these applications is by reading and typing. It's not usually by classes, although classes might help. It's not usually by simple experience sitting in front of a command line and expecting to figure out how to do PHP. It's very often by reading a prescribed way of doing it and learning through experience how to do it yourself. With Scratch, it's much, much simpler. It's very much, as I said, like sitting down with Legos and seeing how things fit together and what they do as a result. Another aspect of this idea is Arduino. Have you ever done anything with electronics, Sean?
Not since I'm a kid, but I've been following the Arduino arena very closely for the past couple of years. I haven't actually done any project work with it or anything, but it is something I am interested in and do pay attention to.
Well, Arduino was exciting to me because it's an open source hardware project. It's essentially a way to use an integrated controller, a chip, in order to control a breadboard. And you can do things like control a fan, or you can control a display, or you can control lights, or you can control sound, or any input and output can be manipulated. And the input is usually sensors or signals, right? So you can, for example, you can use the internet as a signal, as an input signal. You can say, for example, use this RSS library to go out and connect to this website, and whenever there is an item in the RSS feed that says Lamazny, I want you to write out to this display, this little display, yay, Lamazny, right? Or whatever. Like if you can think about an input action and you can think about an output action, you could use Arduino in order to mediate that. We could build, for example, a kiosk in order to get food orders, as we often talk about with Wawa and QuickCheck and the rest. We could use Arduino for a whole bunch of things that are a limited set of options that use either a touchscreen or a sensor like a GPS or a signal like RSS or a light sensor or a camera, a whole bunch of things we could use in order to say, when this happens, do this in response. And it can get very, very sophisticated. You can do all sorts of things with those input sensors. You could have a temperature sensor that says, when the room gets to 68.2 degrees, turn on this blue light. And when the ambient temperature in the room gets to 71.6 degrees, turn on this red light, Or you could say, it's really great for art projects, which is something I'm thinking about doing in conjunction with Artworks Trenton, where you could have several Arduinos set up around the room connected to sensors that are either proximity sensors, in other words, somebody comes close enough in order to trigger it, or temperature sensors, or sound sensors, or pressure sensors. Like you could have pressure sensors as input, and you could say, anytime somebody steps on this pressure sensor, I want you to turn on those 3 lights. And if anybody steps on that pressure sensor over there, I want you to turn on these 3 yellow lights. And if anybody steps on this pressure sensor over there, I want you to turn on these 2 blue lights. And as a result, you could have an interactive, artistic environment that was controlled by the people in the room, as opposed to every other piece of art you've ever seen in your life that is controlled strictly by the artist. So it takes the same idea of web versus Web 2.0, where we began to interact back with websites, and applies it to art, so that you are no longer just a passive viewer of art, like you are most times when you go to a museum, but now you become, in a way, a partial artist. Somebody gave you a platform, somebody gave you a protocol to follow, and according to that protocol, you are able to create new forms of art, right? Mm-hmm. That's Arduino. And I want to say that there are some people who argue against Arduino because it has done such a great job of branding itself. Arduino is an Italian company, and it's open source, and they are very self-promotional. You can build Arduino hardware without buying it. You can go out and get breadboards, and you can go out and get integrated circuits, and you can solder the board yourself and do all those things to come up with an Arduino, or you can just go buy an Arduino. Same is true for most other open source hardware projects.
Why are people against it in the way that you mentioned?
Because those people are often further, more progressively open-minded comparative to me, where they would say, you know what I mean? They would say, there is no benefit to going out and buying an Arduino. There is great benefit in going out and building your own integrated controller.
Okay, yeah.
And, well, it's laughable only because...
not everybody has that level of knowledge to be able to do that.
Not everybody has that level of knowledge, and they tend to forget what it's like to not know how to solder.
Right, and the barrier to entry with Arduino is much lower.
It becomes minimal. It becomes nothing, because all you need to do is read a very small book. And I happen to have an Arduino and some books right here. This is a great introduction to Raspberry Pi, the Raspberry Pi User's Guide. We'll talk about Raspberry Pi in a second. Here is Simon Monk's programming in Arduino, getting started with sketches. Sketches are applications that are built for Arduino that essentially run a particular piece of code. This here is a Raspberry Pi. You can see it's a $35 computer that has video out, it has USB, Ethernet, it has HDMI, that's audio probably. Audio, has controllers that you can, like pins that you can use in order to control sensors, has a processor, beautiful device, $35. And I could use this to replace any number of pieces of hardware that I have here. In a lot of ways, this is more powerful than many of the machines I have running in this space right now. And this is the Arduino Uno. Whoops. You still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. This is the Arduino Uno. I'm doing an unboxing as we speak. Or as I like to call it, a ripping. Here's the Arduino Uno. And it's called the Uno just as a distinction from other Arduino models. And you can see here, here's USB for sending instructions to it, sketches, to be written to the chip. Here is your power. Here are your pins. There are both analog pins and digital pins. There's your integrated controller. These are jumpers right there.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really powerful about it is that it doesn't do anything in and of itself. I can't plug this in. What is that?
What?
I hear some noise in the background there. This doesn't do anything in and of itself. It's not a computer. It doesn't have any software built in aside from what you write to it. In other words, you give it the instructions for what it should do, and you tell it how to do it. So this is really just a medium. It's sort of like what's a good analogy? I don't know, it's a platform. It's sort of like Drupal is a platform. It doesn't do anything great in and of itself out of the box. You have to build what it is that you want it to do greatly. And so back to Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is, as I said, a $35 computer. It has input and output like HDMI and USB. It can be used along with a SD card or even an external USB hard drive like a terabyte drive to be an amazing media server. You can run Linux on it. You can run lots of operating systems on it as long as you can fit it onto an SD card.
It's an ARM processor, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So it means you need to have an operating system that's compiled to run on ARM.
Well, although you could use virtual machines, and many people do.
Okay.
So you can virtualize the hardware so that you can interpret the signals from the operating system to talk to the hardware in sensible ways. Not many people are doing that, though. Most people just run Linux on it because to run Windows on it would almost be counter to the ideology of using open source hardware. And I can't imagine that somebody who's developing Raspberry Pi really cares to have Windows on it anyway. It's sort of antithetical. One and the other don't mix. And so you also wouldn't be able to run Mac OS on it incredibly easily, I don't imagine. But there are many Unixes, many Linuxes. You could run probably Chrome OS on it because that's Linux-based. So anyway, what's nice about Raspberry Pi is in part the size and in part the sort of one-mindedness of it. In other words, when I look at this computer, or I look at that computer, or I look at that computer, I think about all the things that I do on that. In other words, that is my media server. That's where I store all of my ebooks. That's where I store all of the photos I've ever taken. That's where I store, blah, 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 blah. The Raspberry Pi is really meant to do something different. That is to do one thing especially well. almost in a disposable way. Because the cost of the computer is so low, $35, I essentially have the ability to throw it into a backpack to do something like update my Twitter account with my GPS coordinates every 15 minutes, right? You can essentially have a self-tracking device. Or you could use it in conjunction with a phone, sending a signal back and forth in order to do something based on temperature, right? You can, for example, have it be your own weather station for your environment, or whatever. But all you need is some way to collect signals, in the same way that your phone does. But you think about your phone is probably not a $35 device, and
No.
yet you could do most of the things that you do with your phone. That's another thing, is Raspberry Pi, you could run Android on fairly easily. And so you could have your own Android-based Raspberry Pi device with sensors that allows for more sensors than you have on your phone in order to do all the things that your phone does, like GPS, like oscillation, like vibration. You could have it pay attention to all these things. I've heard of a lot of interesting projects. Like somebody was saying, I would like to know when my wash stops because I can't hear it from upstairs, right? Like I have my washer in my apartment, but if I had my washer 3 floors down, I would love it if, they said, I would love it if I could get a signal when my wash was done. And with Arduino, you could potentially do this. You could, with Raspberry Pi or Arduino, you could potentially do this. You could have a sensor that paid attention to vibration, and you could say, whenever there is no vibration for more than 5 minutes, send me an email. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it becomes this sort of, and you would not do that with a $200 computer. Not to mention, you're not going to put that on, you're not going to drag your $200 desktop tower down and put it on top of your washer. But you might do it with a $35 computer that could be used for other purposes. So all of a sudden it becomes this interface that allows you to solve your own problems. And once you do solve the problem, you can theoretically package it in order to be a self-contained solution for that. And you could maybe, if there was a lot of need for people to, find out when something stops vibrating, you could package it and sell it for $50 to make $20 a unit. And it's like a business, If you go on Kickstarter and do a search on Raspberry Pi, you might be surprised at how many of those projects are just based on ideas, that can be accomplished with the Raspberry Pi.
I can almost envision an idea of a company who maybe wants the Wawa touchscreen kiosk, investing in a Raspberry Pi and a touchscreen. You probably could make that happen very easily.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the idea that you could use standards like email or Twitter or whatever to have that information either direct messaged, like you think about if you were a mom and pop shop for that kind of a thing, and you wanted to extend the idea of what Wawa does or what Quick Check does with food, and instead extend it to other kinds of service. Like I don't have a brick and mortar. Most of my work is virtual. But if I had a brick and mortar, I would love for somebody to walk in and let me know what it is that they were there for, much like you do in the Apple Store, where you say, this is my problem. I'd like to talk to a genius, and that gives them a heads up, gives them some idea of what they're in for, allows you to prioritize, etc. But yeah, you could build your own, and it would be with off-the-shelf components that would not require a lot of customization. You could make it as beautiful as you want, but you can also make it as simple as you want. So I wondered if you had any examples of openness as customer service?
Well, one thing that I always do, um, when I used to do a lot of the web work that I do, I'm an advocate of open source tools in the web space. For obvious reasons, cost effectiveness. The fact that they're built on open standards, so that if I no longer work on the project, someone else can pick up. But one thing that I like about it is, whether when I'm done with a project, is zipping up all the code and handing it over to my, even if we, even in a scenario where I've done this before, shut the website down, deleted all the information, the site was no longer needed, giving that customer, like, as we sever ties, listen, here's a zip file of all the source code of your old site that you had paid me to do, and then handing that over to them, so that if in the future, if they want to continue with that work, or reinstate that website, they have the ability to do that. And that's, it's a level of transparency that I operate with on a pretty regular basis. When I worked with the Mercer County Medical Society a couple of years ago, the woman who ran that organization was leaving. I decided to leave along with her, and we had to turn our source code into the state, the New Jersey State Medical Society. In the event that whoever took over the Mercer County Medical Society wanted to establish a web presence again, or whatever, they had all of the the full foundation that we had put in place to make that happen.
Yeah, I love that idea. And that's a big reason why I'm into open source as well, and openness and open standards is exactly that. I very often, when I finish a design job, I not only give them the finished product, but I'll also pass along all the work files, so that if they wanted to, they could go give the work files, usually in SVG, an open standard, vector-based standard, to some other designer to continue the work, because I want to give them the most open opportunity to do as they wish with their content, because it's theirs. It's not mine.
Yeah, so that's something. I'm actually going to be shutting a website down that I used to maintain on June 1st. And I'm actually in a rare situation where I actually don't have anybody to give the code to. So if you want it, go ahead. But transparency, I feel like, is very important. A lot of times we see organizations get trapped behind proprietary homegrown systems. An organization you and I used to work for, used a proprietary content management system.
They sure did.
And I know that it limited that organization's ability to find developers to do work. Whereas if they were using a WordPress or a Drupal or a Joomla, which are built upon open standards, you can go on whatever job site you want and type in WordPress, Joomla, or Drupal, and you'll find hundreds of thousands of developers at your disposal. And because of that, the price of hiring those developers is economical. You know what I mean? Whereas if you were using something proprietary or custom, if there's two people out of hundreds of thousands that know that system, then the price of hiring those developers goes up exponentially. So I think that's a huge reason for establishing web presences with open source tools, or building custom systems using open platforms like Arduino or Raspberry Pi, so that in the event that the person who's created it moves on, there's a strong likelihood of that project continuing on with whoever comes in afterwards. And I think that is a problem that a lot of organizations, they don't really think about the future. They just think about, a lot of IT guys too. They've kind of built in their job security, in a manner of speaking, by making things overly complicated, or making things built the way that only they would build it. And I think that's kind of a bad habit, or bad practice. If I were to ever leave my job, somebody would have no problem picking up all the pieces because everything that I've done is done with open tools, built in accordance with open standards. As long as the person knows the platform, they'll have no problem stepping in and picking up where I left off.
Right. I have a client right now that I am trying to convince to move to a relatively closed proprietary content management system to WordPress, because the pages are the sites are relatively simple, talking about like 30 pages or less. And there's very little reason for them to continue to use this proprietary system, because there's great benefit in moving to something that is less closed.
Gartner, who I am not a big fan of, as you know, even they admitted back in 2010 or 2009 that the era of the proprietary content management system had come and gone. So
right, and the whole reason why they still exist or still hang about is because of legacy. Right. That's our last two co-working environments for you and I. Both have content management systems, or had content management systems that were very much proprietary, and very little community existed for either one of them. So it makes sense that they're being moved away from to more open, more powerful platforms. So can you remind me, what was the other topic we were going to talk about?
You had those three things, which you did talk about.
Yeah.
And then libraries as co-working spaces.
Oh, so there's been a lot of talk recently in our fair town about co-working spaces. Are you familiar with the concept of co-working, Sean?
Yeah, it's a place where just whether you work with somebody or not, you're working in the same space. We hear on the radio all the time for Regis Virtual Offices, which is it's a for-profit organization that exists that sells you co-working space. And I'm sure you're going to be speaking about co-working spaces that can be utilized for free.
Well, that's exactly right. And so tell me some of the benefits of co-working, Sean.
Well, you get to, a collaborative environment. So let's say you're in a co-working space that's for startups. You have a group of people that are all starting up different companies. Being in a startup environment, you can help each other out, solve problems for one another, intermingle, go through, if one startup had difficulty securing VC and another one hasn't secured any at all, they can help one another out in that area. So that's, it's kind of a community sort of vibe, you know what I mean? As they say, it takes a village. So
in that particular aspect of co-working is often referred to as incubation space. So incubation space is a slight deviation from co-working space, which is less about common values, I'm saying co-working is less about common values, whereas incubation space is more about common values. In other words, if all the people who are using the co-working space are not necessarily working for the same company or working with each other directly, but are all working towards the same goals, such as doing startups, etc., then you have a co-working space with incubation. An example of this in our own town is Tiger Labs, which has gained some popularity and has really just started and are already quite successful in developing their space, which is right on Nassau. But they are working in conjunction with the library to extend the idea of what they do to the library. And what's funny about it is that libraries have been co-working spaces for a very long time. It's the idea of bringing together a community of people to do the same kind of work, that being research, or that being study, or that being just coming together, and being able to do so in a safe, clean space with amenities, right? So, and if you've ever been in Princeton Public Library, You know that the art on the walls has a certain culture to it, and the spaces that you sit in have a certain culture to it. And there's a cafe downstairs that you can sit and use the ubiquitous Wi-Fi. And there's a square just outside of the library where you can sit and people watch and sort of pay attention to what's going on in the in that environment. So there is certainly a value and a benefit to something like Tiger Labs, which is much more business minded. And I would say that because I have looked into the price of leasing co-working space at Tiger Labs, and it's really out of my capability in my budget, the library happens to be free and happens to give me most of the benefits that I would have if I pursued something like Tiger Labs. And that doesn't denigrate the benefit or value of Tiger Labs. It just shows that my level of need is at really a far lower level than something that Tiger Labs supports or provides. But I have found myself more frequently now getting up, getting a shower, getting dressed, running over to the library and spending time there because I run into my constituents there. I run into my clients there. I generate work there. I am seen there. I'm able to make new connections there. And so it really provides a lot of the benefits that I would have, and maybe far more than if I was at Tiger Labs, because Tiger Labs is really a focused venue, a very focused set of users use that space, comparative to the library, where a much larger cross-section exists of the community. So I just wanted to put that out there to sort of remind people that if you're interested in co-working space, but you don't know where you're going to get the $300+ a month in order to get that space secured, you should consider the library the original working space with coffee, with Wi-Fi, with comfortable seats, with a fun environment, with the quietude, and with smart, caring people.
It's also a good alternative for communities that don't have these kind of incubation spaces. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you're in Toms River, New Jersey, where I'm pretty sure there are no incubation spaces. I can go to go down to downtown Toms River to the Ocean County Library main branch, and I can co-work there.
I love that place. That is such an amazing library.
That's my childhood library.
Yeah, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of the tile work in that place is just amazing. And that also speaks to, you want, part of the value of Tiger Labs too is that it has a culture unto itself that you bring your clients into. In other words, you meet with clients in those spaces. Mm-hmm. And if I was to do that at Tiger Labs, it would have a certain feeling to it, to the people who I invited in there. In other words, they would say, oh, you're a part of this. Well, in my case, I often meet in the library, and I often use their meeting spaces in the back. They have office-size spaces, about 6 by 10, with tables and chairs and whiteboards, and it's a great, clean, quiet working space that if I can't meet out in the open and rather need to have a relatively private meeting or even a phone call, I can do that in those meeting spaces for free for up to an hour at a time, and I can schedule it far ahead of time. So if I know that I have a meeting coming up at 2 o'clock next week on a Tuesday, I can call the library and say, can I please schedule the space? And I mean, I give back to that space too, but they definitely give me more than I give back. But anyway, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I basically did the same thing at the Rider University Library. I was an advisor for a student organization. We would meet all the time in they called them study rooms, but it was the same kind of thing you described. It was a 6-foot by 10-foot space with a conference table, multiple chairs, audio-visual hookup, and we would meet there regularly. And we would get things done. And when I was in grad school, we would meet there for group projects or preparing for presentations, and it was pretty much the only thing at the Rider University Library that I utilized in my 7 years as a Rider University student. But I got to say, it was extremely beneficial, and definitely one of my favorite things on campus to utilize for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, but the use of the library is often limited to members, which is not free at the Princeton Public Library. In fact, it's quite expensive. But because I speak there, and also because I have a carryover from my time when I worked at Princeton, I get the benefit. I probably will have to pay for it next year, but I certainly won't be paying $300 a month in order to do that.
Yeah, you'd probably pay like $300 for the year or something.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, it's well worth it to do that.
I agree.
So, anything else you have to say, Sean? Have any updates on our various topics, our ongoing topics?
Yeah, next week is the big week for Xbox.
This coming week is the big week for Google I/O.
That's true. Always an interesting event, even for me. I always love reading the things that come out of there because usually it's some really great Android information and other stuff too. So I'm excited to see what's going on there. So thanks for reminding me there.
Absolutely. And incidentally, I was interviewed today in. I'm going to be featured in Route 1 magazine, the newspaper.
Whoa! Whoa! I'll have to pick up my free copy at my local Quiznos for that.
Yeah. I'm going to be, I was interviewed about an upcoming talk on Android. So if you happen to frequent the Route 1 newspaper, you might want to see if you can find a Lamazny in it.
I'm gonna. What issue is it going to be in? The June issue?
It may never see light. We'll see.
Okay. Did you name drop the customer and the service at all?
Of course I did.
Oh, good. I hope so. That's what I'm going to be looking for.
Yeah. Well, I definitely name dropped a few things.
I want to, at some point too, I want to talk about what's going on with T-Mobile.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Maybe next week we can talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, I've been a beneficiary to that model for a very long time. I opted out of their contracts years ago without really knowing. I just saw unlimited data and I was like, yeah, give me that. And then I found out when I tried to get my phone that I was not under contract, and so it didn't. I was going to pay full price for my phone. I said, oh, but I did not mind at all, because I think I have a good price. It's a great model. I can't wait to talk about it.
Good. And just wanted to remind you that we have 2 episodes left before our well-deserved summer hiatus. So next week and the week after. So we hope you will all join us for those next 2.
And I don't want anybody to think of it as a vacation. I want people to think about it as a cold, cold winter.
Winter is coming, as they say in Game of Thrones.
Winter is coming.
Maybe I'll wear my Winter is Coming t-shirt that my mom got me for my birthday.
What did you get your mom for Mother's Day?
I got her a George W. Bush photo essay coffee table book. Of course you did. It just came out. It's by the former White House photographer Eric Draper, who is the longest-serving White House photographer in the history of our country.
I actually love his work. It's beautiful work.
And also, I don't know if you know this, he actually took upon the project of digitizing the entire White House photo archives, taking them from film and negative and digitizing. So that was something that he oversaw during his 8 years in the White House.
That's amazingly important work.
I haven't seen really too much info on that, but if you stumble across anything, I would love to learn more about what he did there.
Well, let's talk. We should talk about that in a future episode as sort of archiving as service or something.
Archive, yeah, the importance of, yeah, absolutely, because that source code that I was talking about that I share, I have an archive of every website I've ever worked on, compressed, encrypted, secured, stored in the cloud in the event that I ever need to roll it back. So
Beautiful.
we should
And
talk about that.
absolutely. And I'm in the process of moving to a new host, and I'm a little worried about some of the things I've seen so far. So we may be talking
Oh, I'd
in,
love to talk about hosting providers. One of my favorite topics.
yeah, well, good. I need to have a little bit more experience first before I throw out any judgments, but definitely.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like maybe we have our next two episodes planned out already.
I think so.
All right,
And no matter what, I always enjoy talking to you, Sean.
me too. And I'll see you next week.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right, bye.
Bye.